Okay, so a way of getting your sample pack ready so that it can be easily exported. Here's my sample pack. I've got my various sounds that I've been creating. Each sound sits on its own track, and I'm going to make sure each sound is only as long as its phrase. There's a duplicate there, just delete that. That's not part of it either. So each sound is only as long as its phrase. And each track, I'm going to label the track how I want the file to be labelled. So following the naming convention that the Native Instruments blog post recommends, start off with what your pack's called. I'm just going to call my pack Monotron. This is a drum sample, so I'm going to call it drums. So it categorizes it with the drums. Then the BPM, it's at 74 BPM. And I've just called this particular drum loop Pretty Loose, because it's pretty loose. Enter. Then you can go through all your different tracks, labeling them. Once you've done that, and everything is set up correctly, we then are ready to export all of those tracks as individual files. So it creates all the files for our pack. If we go up to the File menu, Logic File menu, Export, and usually we go to Bounce, and we bounce the project as a single stereo audio file, and that allows us to play it on any device. But this time in Export, we're going to export all tracks as audio files. When you do that, it asks us a few things. So I'm going to first select where I'm going to save them. I'm going to go to my home folder, local data, sample pack. So they're all going to be saved in there. And then I'm going to carefully look at each one of these parameters here. The range is for each audio track. We've got options about how long should the audio be. We don't want to extend the file length to the end of the project. We're just going to, each sample is just going to have a load of silence on the end of it. We don't want that. What we want it to do is trim the silence just at the file end. So each region will be only as long as the region, if that makes sense. Save format. I'm going to choose WAV because, as I've said, it's the most universal one. Bit depth, I'm going to keep it 24-bit. Multi-output software instruments, I'm not really using any, but you may have noticed things like Ultrabeat or drummer tracks. You can expand them and you see kick drum, snare drum, they have an individual track for each element of the software drum machine. That's up to you if you want to export it as one file per track or one file per instrument. Probably for a sample pack, probably one file per instrument, because you will have created musical phrases, loops using the instrument. Or if you've just done one-shot sounds, again, they're only programmed as one shot anyway, so that's going to work fine. So one file per instrument. You've worked hard making your sounds sound cool, so you don't want to bypass all the effects plugins. You want to leave them as they are. Normalize. Let's normalize them to 0 dB, so let's have that turned on. So it'll conform all your sounds to 0 dB for us. This is useful if you're going to re-import the sounds and use them in your project. So it re-imports them back into your project. So essentially you're exporting and then re-importing. We don't need to do that for this. We're just exporting. So let's leave that unchecked. And here is the file name thing. And this is a really useful thing in the batch conversion process. You can create a naming convention here. You can have the track number if you want. Put that at the beginning. Track number, track name, year if you want. I don't really need year. I don't really need track number. Because I've already gone through and named all my tracks carefully, I'm just going to use my track name. That's it. Let's hit export. If you had a huge project, now's the point you can go away and make a cup of tea. Come back when it's done.
I really want a cup of tea now.
So it's going through exporting each track as an individual file. It will go to the end of the longest track. Then it will stop. Then it will normalize the sounds. Oh yeah, it might go to the end of the actual project. It's lucky we didn't choose export silence to end of project because we just ended up, all of this section here would be silence. So we don't want that. There's the end, so it'll get to the end. Great. Let's go and find the files now. So if I go back to Finder, each of us local data sample pack. Cool. So there's the sounds. Notice where I haven't labelled my tracks, it's given me really unhelpful file names. So who knows what audio 10-1 is? That's a bit better, but what's the problem with that one? Drum break, but there's no information about BPM or anything. That was the original file, we can ignore that. Here's the one that we labelled properly. So monotone, drums, 74 BPM, pretty loose. It automatically puts a number on the end of these to allow for different takes and things like that. Let's just have a listen to that. Helps if we've got this. My audio is not coming through, but hopefully it's recorded. It's not set up quite right, ready to play back. But what you should find is all your files are trimmed. They all might be slightly different length durations. Because they're all different length regions. The good thing about that one, if you've been careful labelling all your tracks, is that it does all of the complex file naming for you. So that's, you don't have to do all of that. It saves a lot of time. Especially if you realised something went wrong and you have to export it all again. Imagine if you just finished renaming all the files and you have to go through and rename them all again. That'd be really annoying. So if they're all named in the project, it will just export them each time with that name. one thing I didn't mention, make sure, and I think what's happened with mine is, because I've started a lot of my audio at bar 5, what I should have done is made sure they all start bar 1, beat 1, because it always exports from the beginning. Actually, probably if I go and zoom through halfway, there it is, yeah. I've accidentally exported a load of silence at the beginning of each one. Great. So yeah, just make sure all your sounds start at the beginning. Great. And then the only thing to do perhaps would be to, if I had loads of different types of things, I might put them in subfolders. One might be drums. Put my drum things within the drums folder. One might be bass. That one's a bass sound, might put that in the bass folder. So it's a bit more organised. Maybe some of the sound effects, things like that. That filter one is more of a drum one, you can put that in there. If you've labelled your tracks, then it should be quite quick just to drop them in whatever type of folder they are.